Hey everyone, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Sarah, and today I'm going to do a book recommendation tag. I saw one YouTuber in particular do this, and I just really liked all the questions on this tag, so I copied them down and I'm going to do it. I'm not sure if she started, I don't think she started it, but I will reference her. Her name is Carmen Gilfraguda. I hope I pronounced that right. And yeah, I thought the questions were so fun, and I thought this would be a really great way to kind of introduce myself and kind of what I like to read, honestly. So I thought this would be a good early on video. I was gonna make this honestly my first video, but the Women's Fiction Prize kind of took that away from me. I just really want to talk about some of that. So anyway, here goes with the book recommendation tag. The first prompt is a book you tell everyone is your favorite. And for me, that is My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa Moshfegh. And I'm sure if you've been on BookTube for more than like 5 minutes, you have come across this book in one way or another, so I'm not going to talk about the plot too much, but I don't know, this book, it means a lot to me. It's either really well loved or really hated by a lot of different people. I don't know that too many people have kind of like a neutral view on it. I mean, maybe some people just found it kind of like boring or not for them, but most people either just really don't like it, they really don't like the narrator, or they also really love it. And I really love this book. I read this in 2020 and for the first time, and I just really thought, I was like, where's my year of rest and relaxation? And then it kind of happened. Not exactly though. I did not get to sleep for a full year, which is what this narrator tries to do. She is definitely depressed and just has the goal of sleeping through a whole year, kind of to change her life, to refresh her life. Doesn't necessarily explain the sort of point behind doing this, honestly, like why she thinks she will feel that way necessarily, but that's what she tries to do. And I don't know, I think this book has really been there for me during my like kind of depression and a lot of my sort of difficult days. There's a sort of hopefulness to it at some point, but even the difficult stuff, like it's a little relatable. I mean, not completely, because I am not a super rich person living in New York City, but there are definitely elements of this that are relatable. So I love this book. I would say it is one of my favorites, even though it is otherwise kind of a hard question to answer. The second prompt is a book that is your guilty pleasure, and I don't really have a specific book for this because honestly, I don't have too many books that are guilty pleasures. At least I haven't really read any recently. I feel like maybe when I used to read more manga or something, some of that was a little bit of a guilty pleasure. Not to say that manga can't be like serious or interesting, but some of the ones I read were definitely less so. As well as, I don't know, occasionally there are thrillers I read where I pick them up and very quickly on feel like the writing isn't always great, or I know that the ending will not be that satisfying to me, but at the same time I kind of want to know where it goes, so I continue on with it. So maybe that would kind of count as a guilty pleasure read. I don't have a specific thriller for this though, and not all thrillers are like this. There's definitely some I read that are great and interesting and blow my mind with how they, I don't know, how the author like maneuvered things around to the crazy ending, but there are some that are very much not like that. So sometimes those thrillers, maybe I would say that, but that's probably it. The third prompt is a book everyone loved but you didn't, and I would say that would be Honey Girl by Morgan Rogers, which is a book I saw a lot about on BookTube, and the cover is beautiful. The general like idea behind the book is so interesting. I thought this was such a cool idea. It's about a young woman doing her PhD, and she goes to Vegas kind of just for like a, I don't know if it was just like a fun weekend, I don't know, I forget if it was to celebrate something or not. She just goes and she gets married to another woman, and then they both just kind of leave. And yeah, they didn't know each other before, they just kind of just got married, and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool, interesting idea. But I really did not like any of the characters in the book. I thought they all sounded like the same person, honestly, like, and I know, I'm sure most people have friends who are very similar to them, similar hobbies, similar a sense of humor or something, but this was just too much. Also, the main character's mom was very, like, I don't know, had a very similar, like, way of speaking, way of thinking to her, that I just, like, it seemed very unrealistic. Everyone just, I don't know, it didn't feel like the author differentiated the characters from each other too much. And I think there was supposed to be a sort of, like, well, this character's overcoming, like, a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety about being kind of, like, the best she can be in school and everything. And I don't know, some of that was a little relatable, but honestly it was just a little frustrating to read. It just wasn't for me, but I think that was mostly because of the character thing. I think otherwise, like, I was interested enough to read to the end, like I wanted to see whether the two women would end up together or not and kind of how that would work, but But yeah, there was just a few things that ruined it for me. But everyone really liked this book. I had a lot of recommendations, and I was seeing it everywhere for a while. I don't really see it talked about anymore, but for a while it was very much all around BookTube. So yeah, not a fan, unfortunately. The fourth prompt is a book you read the fastest. And the last one I could remember that being is Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead by Emily Austen. I've read this book twice now. I read it kind of recently, and I read it for the first time last year. And both times it took me just a little over a day to read it. It's not like a super long book, but it's not a super short book either. It's just a very quick and easy read and very captivating for me. It's about another young woman with a lot of anxiety around work, her family, her relationships, and she accidentally picks up this job at a church where she goes in to get some sort of like free therapy or counseling, but the pastor there thinks that she's there for a job, and she ends up taking this job, which was previously held by another older woman who had died, and so she's kind of like thinking about this woman who died. She worries about death a lot too, as do I. So this was a very relatable book to read. It was hilarious. Like, reading it the first time, so funny, and reading it the second time, still laughing like on things. I loved it. It also made me cry a couple times. It made me cry on page 4, I think, which is maybe the earliest that I've ever cried at a book. Yes, page 4. The main character makes a discovery when she is a child about something, and I don't know, just the way it was written just made me tear up. So I love this book, and I highly recommend it. Maybe you will get through it as quickly as I did if you like it too. Fifth tag is a book that you believe deserves more recognition, and this for me is Little Blue Encyclopedia for Vivian by Hazel Jane Plant. And this is a book from the perspective of a trans woman whose best friend, another trans woman, has recently died, and so she is kind of sorting through these feelings. She had some romantic feelings for this friend that were not reciprocated, but they were both very close with each other, and so she's kind of working through the feelings she had for their friendship, the romantic feelings, and the things she kind of misses about it. And the way she does this is the two characters, they had this sort of favorite show that the narrator was introduced to by her friend who passed away, called Little Blue, and this is not a real show, but it felt very real in the book, which is another thing. Yeah, so she writes sort of an encyclopedia on this book for her friend in kind of a memoriam, and just from letter A to Z, I believe, just all these characters, these settings, different things in the book, or sorry, in the show, she writes about. And so you kind of get brought into this world of this show called Little Blue, which, yes, like I said, feels so real. Like, I wanted to watch the show. It's like in the book world, it's like this kind of cult classic, and it sounds like something I'd be very into, honestly. So she's doing that, and then you also like obviously learn more about the narrator, kind of her life, the life of her friend who died. And I don't know, it was very touching, it was very moving. It was a really cool concept with this encyclopedia idea, with bringing in this fictional TV show, which I'm sure has been done before in other books, but I thought it was done super well here. And yeah, I don't even remember how, I literally stumbled across this book at the library. I just like picked it up because I saw like the cover, it was like, it's an all blue book, and I read the description, I was like, oh, this sounds pretty good. And I read it earlier this year and really, really liked it. I highly recommend this book, and I've not seen it be recommended anywhere else, honestly. So yeah, if this sounds interesting to you, I recommend looking more into it and picking it up. The next tag is a book that is becoming a TV show or a movie, and I'm kind of cheating. I don't really keep up with like what's turning into a TV show or movie. I like movies, and I'll watch whatever sounds interesting. I don't watch as many TV shows, and yeah, I don't really hear about things until after they've come out or after someone recommends them to me. So I'm just gonna pick one that is already a movie because I want to talk about it and because I loved it, and that is White Noise by Don DeLillo. This is a book that was written in the 1980s, and I read it for the first time a couple years ago and was very surprised by how much I loved it, honestly. It feels very timely and so relatable, and this was turned into a movie in 2022, and it features Adam Driver, and I loved the movie. I saw it at the Toronto International Film Festival, like theaters, not during the actual festival, unfortunately, but that was the only place I could find where it was screening, and yeah, like I said, I loved it. It had everything I wanted in a movie, and not just because it features Adam Driver as the lead character. it just felt like it fit the book so well. Whenever I would hear like a joke from the book or a reference from the book, I'd be like, oh my god, I would just freak out. And there were a couple things that were missing that I would have loved to include in the movie, but I understand why they were maybe left out. Yeah, I made a TikTok on this when I was a little bit more active on TikTok. I would one day maybe love to do an even further deep dive into this book, because I just think it has a really good sort of conversation on environmentalism, on kind of how we as humans react to situations of disaster, things we kind of have to sort of like tell ourselves are okay, just or like forget about so we don't live in constant anxiety. There's a very large amount of talk about death in this book, which maybe if you get to know me more, you'll know that I have a huge like amount of anxiety around death, but I also love talking about it because I think it kind of helps. And this book does talk about it. I think there's a character in this book who says, I'm afraid to die, and she just says it straight up. And to me, I was just like, wow, like I don't hear that said from a lot of people, either in literature or media or just like my friends, but I say and think it all the time. So it was really great to read that, and I was just like, holy shit, like same. I don't know if that's maybe not like so interesting to you or relatable. I mean, I hope it's not. I hope you don't share this anxiety because it sucks. But to me, it was just cool to read about that. There's a lot more about this book that could probably be said, but I don't want to say too much. But I recommend looking this up if it sounds at all interesting. I would say you can watch the movie without reading the book, but I do think it helps to have like the book read. My partner and one of my friends watched this movie as well, and neither of them were like as big of a fan of it as me. And my one friend said that she thinks if she read the book first, she might have had like a sort of different appreciation for it. So take it from her maybe. The seventh prompt is a book you have reread the most, and for me, I think that is not just one book, but a whole series, and that is the Click series by Lacey Harrison. These are books that I was obsessed with from about the 5th to maybe 9th grade or so. The first book came out maybe a year or two before I entered the 5th grade. My mom found it at a used bookstore, just bought it for me. She would occasionally like buy me random books from like Value Village, and wow, this one was a hit. I reread the first book so many times before I finally convinced my mom to go to like a bookstore with new books to buy me the second book, which had already been out for a while, and we slowly like caught me up to where the series was at. And then every time a new book would come out, I would immediately call my local bookstore and I would ask them to order it, and they did. There are so many books in the series. I don't even know how many more, 14 or 16. There's like sub books, and I just loved this series, which wasn't good because, and I think the message of the series was that you shouldn't, sorry, I should explain. This is the book about like a bunch of popular girls at a private school in Westchester. If you haven't heard about it, if you were a young girl growing up between like 2004 and 2008, I feel like you probably would have heard at least a little bit about it or seen it in a bookstore, but maybe not. Yeah, and so there's these like 4 popular girls, and then one of them, her dad's friend's family moves into like their guest house, and they have a daughter her age who is very uncool, and there's a lot of like drama that goes on between them, like will she be accepted, will she not, into this sort of clique. And yeah, I don't know, I feel like this book was meant to tell you kind of like, don't be a bully, like fashion isn't everything, makeup isn't everything, being cool isn't everything, but I did not get that message as a child. Honestly, I just wanted designer clothing and to be well liked and have a big group of like cool friends who sort of like ruled the school, and I never had that, needless to say. But for a while that is something I wanted, and so I don't know if like this was on me reading this book poorly, or if maybe the author, I don't know, maybe, I don't want to blame her, it was probably on me. I reread this book maybe the series 4 years ago or so, maybe a little bit longer, but definitely kind of into my adulthood, and I feel like I should reread it again to see like if the messages were a bit more obvious and I just was not wanting to see them, or like wanting to know the lesson that I should be learning. Yeah, I don't know that I recommend these books, maybe as like a fun sort of guilty pleasure read for some of you, or to revisit them if they were also a book you liked. I would not recommend this to young girls though, honestly. Just, I don't know, maybe someone would be more perceptive than I was and wouldn't read them in the same way I did, but I wouldn't want to take that risk, honestly, because I wasted too much time like caring about silly things like popularity. Anyway, okay, we are only like halfway through this list, and I have been talking for so much, so I don't want this video to be like super long. But next book is a book from a genre you don't normally read, and for me that is sci-fi, and this book is The Employees, a workplace novel of the 22nd century. Yeah, I used to read a lot more sci-fi when I was in high school and kind of early university, in my early 20s, but for some reason the last few years I've not read nearly as much, but this is one that I read last year for the first time. It's a pretty quick, like, short book, and it's about workers on this spaceship in the 22nd century. Some are humans, some are AI or humanoid, and they're transporting these mysterious objects from one place to another, and these objects sort of, I don't know, emit some sort of like feelings throughout the spaceship and make the crew kind of long for some sort of comfort and intimacy and friendship, both the humans and humanoid crew. And it's kind of told in these, I don't know if you'll be able to see these, but it's really different, I don't like spoil anything, but like you can maybe see like statement 75. It's told me these very short like blips from people's lives, people's experiences on this cruise ship. And at first there's not really a huge amount of plot, but it does sort of build up and grow, and you sort of get a sense of what's going on. I definitely feel like I need to reread this because I was fairly confused when I first did, but I did enjoy it. It was a very unique sort of book, and I really liked it. If you're into sci-fi, I would definitely recommend checking it out, and even if you're not, I would also recommend it. A book that deserves all the hype it gets is The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett, my bad. I don't really hear this book talked about as much anymore, but when it came out in 2019 or 2020, I saw so much about it, and it was longlisted and then shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction, so I did end up reading it and was really glad I did. This one didn't win, but I was wondering if it maybe would, because it was a very good book, really well written. It's about these two light-skinned black women who grew up in this town, end up kind of going separate ways, and one of them ends up living her life as a black woman. She moves back to this town and with her family, and the other one ends up passing as a white woman, and she gets a white husband and ends up living in a mostly white community, and they both end up having daughters as well. So you follow the lives of these two women as they kind of grow up, and then their daughters as well, and kind of how their different lives as they like have moved away from each other, like what they've led them to. I think both perspectives, honestly, like of the two women and their daughters, like they're both really good. I think some people maybe liked one like generation more than the other. I thought they were both good. I was very interested in reading both of them. So yeah, I really like this book. I think it got a lot of hype. Britt Bennett, and I don't know how many more books she has. I know she has at least one more that I heard a lot about, so I totally recommend this one. I want to reread it sometime soon, honestly. Number 10 is a book you usually recommend, and honestly it was kind of hard to pick one because it really depends who I'm talking to. I sometimes recommend My Year of Rest and Relaxation to people if they like books and kind of like the literary fiction or kind of weird depressed girl genre sort of books. But if I'm talking to someone else, I will not recommend that. Someone who's not as into that. I will often recommend The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. It's a really interesting fantasy novel about a world where kind of apocalyptic events just happen every so often, and people just kind of have to adapt. Like things just get ruined. I haven't read it in a really long time. It's part of another series, and I really want to reread it. I don't have them with me in this house right now, but I'm gonna hopefully grab them soon because I've been thinking about it for quite a while now that I want to read this again. But I would say that one is one I recommend pretty often, just because it's, I don't know, a lot of people are more recently, at least the people I talk to and recommend to, are pretty into fantasy, I find, and this one is not like a super difficult fantasy book to read, but it's also very new and interesting if you haven't read a lot of fantasy as well. So yeah, that's my recommendation for that. The next one is a book that has your favorite characters, and this one was a bit tricky for me to think about, but I would say it's probably Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. I won't say too much about this book because I think most people know at least a little bit about what it's about. I really love the movie. I really enjoyed the book. When I read it, I was quite young, and it's another one I'd like to reread. Honestly, I bought this beautiful copy to reread at some point, and I just haven't gotten around to it yet. But yeah, I don't know, I love how all the sisters are very unique, have their own sort of stories, how they kind of like get along, but their fights as well. I don't know, I just think it's like a very beautiful family story. So yeah, this is the first one that I could like really think about, so here it is. Next prompt is a book that you wish you could live in, and this one was kind of a tough one for me because I read a lot of literary fiction which takes place in kind of like the real world, and it's like, would I like to live in a cool apartment in New York City? I mean, yeah, maybe, but that feels like kind of a boring answer, honestly. So the next one I could kind of think about was the series The Gilded Wolves by Roshani Chokshi, and this is a book about a group of friends, honestly, who live in like 1889. I believe it's first set in Paris. They do kind of move around, but I think, yeah, they're from Paris, and they are kind of on the hunt for this mysterious artifact so that one of them can get his true inheritance from the person who wants this artifact. And it's sort of like a mystery. There's a lot of cool magic and like descriptions of architecture and technology in this book. Like I said, it takes place in 1889, so I don't think I would want to live in this world as a poor person, even if there was magic, honestly, because there's also a lot of like cool descriptions of like lavish balls and dinners, which I'm here for that, but I don't think everyone in this world obviously has access to that, just like the real world. But it was like a very beautiful book to read, so based on those descriptions alone, I think that might be my choice for now. Next prompt is a book you thought you would hate but ended up loving, and that is Pod by Laline Paul. It's the only one I could think of like off the top of my head immediately, because there's not a lot of books I like think I will hate but end up loving. Like if I don't think I'll like a book, I usually don't end up liking it. I don't know if that's just me going in with like a bad sort of like attitude towards it. I also don't read a lot of books I don't think I will like, honestly. So, but yeah, this one, I read it for the women's long list, and now it has made it onto the short list, and I'm really glad I read it because it was a really interesting, unique book from the perspective of a lot of sea creatures, and which maybe sounds kind of lame, and it is a bit of a divisive book in the sort of community who's following this prize, but I really enjoyed it. I have like more videos on the Women's Prize for Fiction where I talk about this book a bit more, but if you think a book about dolphins and other sea creatures and environmentalism and sort of human effects on nature and the ocean is interesting or not, either way, maybe check it out because I really liked it. So that's what I have for that recommendation. The 14th prompt is a book that made you cry, which is a lot of books for me, honestly, but I want to talk about one that I have not seen talked about much on Book Talk, and that is Just Last Night by Mary McFarlane. I read this a few years back. It is about a group of friends, 4 friends, and the narrator has a crush on one of the male friends in this group, but there's been some like confusing feelings around that, but they've never dated. It has not been reciprocated really in the way she's wanted it to. One of these friends in this group dies at one point, and there's a lot of secrets kind of get dragged up about this friend group. The narrator ends up going on like a bit of a road trip, a bit of like a journey with a sibling of the person who dies, and it is just very moving. It is a very like compelling love story. I really enjoyed it. I didn't necessarily think I would. I don't know what it is about these covers, but I just don't always like books with this kind of cover for some reason. I don't read a lot of romance either, but I loved this one. It was the ending that made me cry, honestly. I just burst into tears. It was just very lovely, and I recommend it just for that like final moment alone in the book. I loved it so much. And yeah, it wasn't a book I thought I would hate that I loved, but it was definitely an unexpected like favorite of mine. And finally, the last tag is a book you wish you could read again for the first time. And for me, that would be Transcendent Kingdom by Yaa Gyasi. And I read this book for the Women's Fiction Prize. It was longlisted and then shortlisted as well. And that's how I kind of heard more about it. I think I'd seen it a little bit around BookTube, but I don't know, I had not read it until that point. But I'm glad I did because I really loved it. This is about a young woman, her name is Gifty, and she is in her, I believe, 5th year studying neuroscience, doing her PhD on neuroscience. And kind of part of the reason for that is to sort of unlock maybe like the reasoning behind the suffering that her family has seen. Her brother was a gifted athlete who suffered an injury, got addicted to painkillers, and unfortunately died from an overdose, and which led to a difficult time for obviously her and her mother, who now can hardly get out of bed. And so she's just kind of trying to understand all the suffering around addiction, around depression, kind of managing her own feelings, her family that is kind of broken now. Her brother is dead, her father is not really in the picture, and this is another book that honestly made me cry. This could fit into that tag too. I did cry quite a bit reading this, but it's just, I don't know, it was a very moving book. It was one of those books where like there's a lot of like really beautifully written passages. I wish I borrowed this book from the library. Unfortunately, I don't own it, but I'm sure I could if I did, I could like highlight or sticky notes and sort of like many passages from this book. And just again, the ending, that's kind of again more where I cried, I think, towards the end. Just the way things kind of get wrapped up in this book, I really loved, and I would love to experience for the first time. So that would probably fit under that tag for me, and if you haven't read this book yet, I do highly recommend it. Okay, so those are all my recommendations. I know I probably rambled on about them for quite a while. Yeah, the video I watched, I think she kept it under like 14 minutes or something. I feel like this video is going to be so much longer than that. But these are all books I really love. I hope maybe you will get like a cool recommendation from these. I hope I described some of them well enough, because I feel like I'll just talk about like vague things of what I like about this book without talking about the plot so much. But I feel like quite a few of these are books that you might have seen around, if you've been on BookTube for a while. But yeah, I love all these books a lot, except for the one that everyone loved but I didn't. And I do recommend all of them. And I mean, if that last one that I didn't like also sounds like something you'd enjoy, then I recommend it too, honestly. But that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. It really means a lot to me as I'm starting on this channel. It's very exciting to be able to like talk about books I like. So please leave a comment if you've read any of these books. If you also have like your own recommendations, I mean, literally write out your entire tag for me if you want, or let me know that you've made a video, because I would love to check it out. I love getting new recommendations. That's how I discovered most of these books, was through other people's recommendations, either on BookTube, maybe through like the Women's Prize for Fiction shortlist. Maybe some of these have been recommended by friends, but I don't just always stumble across books myself, so I thrive off recommendations. So if you have any, please leave a comment. And yeah, thank you again so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next video.